Welcome to the last session, session number 9 on chapter 9, the different scientific models. We're just going to go over a review, kind of a summary of how many models we've looked at and what are the dividing line differences between the summary of scientific models, science models. The first model we looked at was evolutionary theory. And that theory could be divided down into two submodels, which would be the Darwinistic model and the punctuated equilibrium model of today. And all these models represent basically divisions within the last maybe 50 years, maybe even a little bit longer than that, but they're mostly very recent divisions. Evolutionary theory, intelligent design theory, whereas they believe in a theory that it looks designed in that it looks like it's very complicated and that there must have been an injection of information at some point by an intelligent source that's outside the system to have got evolution to unfold in the way that it did, producing such intricate patterns. Theistic evolution, then evolutionary theory, evolutionary creation theory, and then there's the old Earth creation theory, then the young Earth creation theory, and then, as I've added, the young Earth creator theory. So as you can see, there's over 7 different theories there that represent the different thoughts. What we're talking about, though, is in relation to critical thinking. There is a dividing line in that you can only practice one science to be applied under critical thinking that's accepted. The tenet of modern day science today, so in other words, what is the basis of modern day science today? Can we practice the 7 different models that are being practiced out there today? And the answer would be no, you cannot, because every one of those models allow for some component of the supernatural to interact with the domain of matter in some way. And modern day science requires one major tenet, which is methodological naturalism. And what that just means is all the methods that you're doing your science by has to be natural. In other words, you have to practice methodological naturalism for today's science. You can't talk about God, designers, you can't talk about creators, you can't talk about anything that would influence upon a closed system. It's a closed system. So in other words, if you're going to do science, you have to do science in a closed system. Methodological naturalism is the term for the required assumption of philosophical naturalism when working with the scientific method. So in other words, when you're working with science, you have to assume methodological naturalism. So you can't say, wow, that looks designed. No, that would not be an acceptable observation, because that design that you're inferring is referring to some source outside of the system, and that would not fall under methodological naturalism. Well, what about then the evolutionary creationism? Well, no, because now you're coupling evolution with creation, and that somehow there is an evidence of a creator through what has evolved. And that is a violation of methodological naturalism also. So every one of the 7 different models of science violate this number one tenet, which would be the methodological naturalism. Methodological naturalism requires that scientific inquiry relies solely on natural explanations and empirical evidence. By doing so, it creates a framework where scientific questions are approached with an expectation of observable outcomes, while personal religious beliefs are considered outside of this scope. So in other words, it's the Thomas Aquinas, the division of secular sacred, the division of science from the sacred, from the church, and that we can look at things. So this is what the only acceptable model, even though we've gone over 7 different models, the only acceptable model today within science proper is a science that recognizes and does not transgress the law of methodological naturalism. There was a lawsuit that was brought a number of years ago by a group of, it was in Dover, and they were wanting to include intelligent design and other models of science in the curriculum of the school. And the judge came up with this reply, and with this how he settled the account. He says, while supernatural explanations may be important and have merit, they are not a part of science. This self-imposed convention of science, which limits inquiry to testable natural explanations about the natural world, is referred to by philosophers as methodological naturalism. So the judge is saying, while supernatural explanations may have merit to some, you cannot include them in science. They're outside the realm of science by this little rule called methodological naturalism. And everybody that practices science must practice it according to this rule, methodological naturalism. Now, again, all the other science models that we looked at, they all transgress at some point the methodological naturalism by proposing that there was a designer, there was a creator, there was an influence, and so in other words, if you propose anything that is beyond this closed system, then your model is no longer scientific. It would be classified as pseudo-scientific and therefore no longer even acceptable to apply critical thinking to. The judge goes on. He says, and is sometimes referred to as the scientific method. Methodological naturalism is a ground rule of science today, which requires scientists to seek explanations in the world around us based upon what we can observe, test, replicate, verify, and explain within a closed system. So that is the ground rule. Even though today we have 7 different scientific models that are even being practiced today by different groups, every one of them transgress this law of methodological naturalism if they propose that, it looks designed. It looks, because you can't propose that. We had quotes in there before that even though it looks designed, even though it looks created, even though it looks purposeful, we have to remember it's not. This is a quote by one of the scientists that I had quoted earlier. That is Francis Collins. In his ministry that he has, the BioLogos, he was interviewed. And Francis Collins is a Christian. He is a believer. He believes in God. He believes in miracles. And he's a scientist. So he was being interviewed. And they asked him this question. As a scientist who looks for natural explanations of things and demands evidence, how can you also believe in miracles like the resurrection? Okay, this was an interview in Time magazine, and they're saying, okay, so you say you're a Christian and you're a very well-known geneticist. How do you as a scientist practice science and believe in miracles? Because you're transgressing the basic rule of methodological naturalism. As a scientist who looks for natural explanations of things and demands evidence, how can you believe in miracles like the resurrection? You can't. So in other words, that's the dividing line, in that whenever we come up with a different model of science to incorporate our little belief system or our nuances, then that's going to create a pseudoscience that will not be acceptable because it does not follow methodological naturalism. So what is the summary? Looking at summary of the scientific models. Using methodological naturalism as a filter for critical thinking. Okay, this is all about critical thinking. And critical thinking is there are no spirit world. There are no demons. There are no gods. And when we're critical thinking, we have to think based in human reason, based on methodological naturalism. So using that as a filter, we then look at, okay, all the different scientific models. The only model that is not filtered out is number one, the evolutionary theory model is the only one that maintains the methodological naturalism. All the other models, which would be intelligent design theory, theistic evolution theory, evolutionary creation theory, old earth creation theory, young earth creation theory, young earth creator theory, they all violate that one rule of methodological naturalism. So in other words, none of them would qualify as a scientific model. They would all be categorized as pseudoscience because they do not hold up methodological naturalism. So, is everybody convinced that there's only one scientific model, and that is the model that explains everything? Well, again, we have to choose. We have to choose our source of reliable knowledge. We choose our basic beliefs. We choose our model of philosophy or our theoretical system of thought. We then develop methods, and we choose our methods of what is going to get us to reliable knowledge. Then we choose a scientific model that then reflects all the belief system. And we, at the end of the day, we realize and we know when we get to the top, we built this structure. This structure is my structure. It is something I believe in. This is a letter, or just a quote from a letter that was sent to Asa Gray, a scientist in the time of Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin was communicating to him, and he was expressing to Asa some of his concerns. And so Charles Darwin says, "The sight of a feather in a peacock's tail, whenever I gaze at it, makes me sick." Okay, there was no explanation given in the context. Why would Charles Darwin, looking at a peacock tail's feather, gazing at it, why would that make him sick? I could come up with a few interpretations of my own, but that would be imposing my own interpretation on it. So it's kind of like, okay, I believe that Charles Darwin built his edifice of his structure of thinking and of practice, but when it comes down to it, you still understand and know that you have excluded God on purpose, and that you have adopted methodological naturalism, but yet that methodological naturalism does not really explain the intricacies of a peacock feather. And that we really know that even though it appears to be designed, it appears to be created, it appears to be purposeful, we must remember it is not. Or can we? Romans chapter 1 talks about that man knows through that which has been created, he is without excuse. That he sees clearly, plainly, that there is a God and that there is a creator and that what has been created reflects his attributes. The sight of a feather in a peacock's tail, whenever I gaze at it, makes me sick. Charles Darwin wrote to fellow scientist Asa Gray in 1860. I just hope that when you make your decisions and you put your house together, that you are convinced of the truth of it, and that it's not just a house that we're putting together to justify what we already believe, but it's truth. It's a house that reflects the truth of what is really out there, and that when our time comes to stand before our Creator, we will not be embarrassed. We will not be ashamed, but that we will confess He is Lord and He is Creator, and that to Him and Him alone deserves all the glory, all the grandeur, all the power, forever and ever. Amen. That's wrapping up chapter 9, different science models. And we've gone over about 7 of them, different models that are out there today. And but yet 6 of them would be considered a pseudoscience because it does not follow the basic rule of methodological naturalism, which was imposed by the early Greeks starting in 600 BC. Thanks again for joining me. This is wrapping up chapter 9, different scientific models. We're Tim and Holly. Thanks again for joining me.